Namaste and good morning to all of you. Let's start with our mantra recitation. Om Parthaye Pratibodhitam Bhagavata Narayan Swayam Vyasen Gratitam Puran Munina Madhye Mahabharatam Advaitamrit Varshine Bhagavati Mashtadeshadhyayane Amutvam Anusandhame Bhagavat Gite Bhagaveshane Namoastu Te Vyas Vishal Buddhe Full Arvind Ayat Patra Netar येन्तव्या भारत तैलपूर्णः प्रज्वलितो ज्ञानमय प्रदीपः प्रपन्न पारिजाताय तोत्र वेत्र एकपानय ज्ञान मुद्राय कृष्णाय गीता अमृतुहे नमः सर्वोपनिषदो गावो दोग्धा गोपाल नंदना पार्थो वत्सा सुधीर भोगता दुग्धम गीता अमृतम महत वसुदेव सुतम देवम कंस चानूर मर्दनम देवकी परमानंदम कृष्णं वंदे जगद्गुरुं भीष्म द्रोण तटा जयद्रथ जला गांधार नीलोत्पला शल्य ग्राहवती कृपेन वाहने कर्णेन वेलाकुला अश्वत्थाम विकर्ण घोरमकरा दुर्योधन अवर्तने सो तीर्णा खलु पांडवै रन नदी कवर्तका केशवा पाराशरे वत्सरोजमलम गीता अर्थगंधोतकम नानाख्यानक केसरम हरि कथा संबोधन अबोधिकम लोके सज्जन षटपदय रह ते पिये मानम मुदा भूयात् भारत पंकजम कलिमल प्रध्वंसी न श्रेयसे मूकं करोति वाचालं पंगुम लंघ्यते गिरिं यत्कृपातमहं वन्दे परमानंद माधवम् यम ब्रह्म वरुण इंद्र रुद्र मरुतः स्तुन्वन्ति दिव्यस्तवे वेदै सांग पद क्रमोपनिषदे गायन्ति यम सामका ध्यानवस्थि तद्गतेन मनसा पश्यन्ति यम योगिनो यस्यन्तं न विदुसुर असुरगणा देवाय तस्मै नमः. If you remember a few weeks ago when we were on verse number 54, Arjuna asked a question. And in that question, he wanted to know the description of the state of mind in a man of realization, merged in the self-experience. And the second part of that question was, he wanted an explanation of how that experience will influence this yogi's actions in outer world. How can he sit? How can he walk? How can he talk? He said, sthit dhi. So that is a term he uses, sthit dhi. A person who has a steady wisdom, self-realized person. Kim prabhashet, kim asit, vrajet kim. How does one of steady wisdom speak? How does he sit? And how does it work? And that's what Lord Krishna is trying to explain it to him and to us also. When we had our last class, we saw verse number 58. Lord Krishna gave an analogy of a turtle. He said, when like the turtle which withdraws on all sides its limbs, he withdraws his senses from the sense objects. Then his wisdom becomes steady. So an enlightened sage, a yogi, intelligently masters the senses and the mind. Whenever it encounters any danger, just like a turtle protects itself by drawing its limbs and head inside its shell, the sage also does the same thing. He possesses a certain level of control over the mind and senses. He can retract and extract them according to the needs of the situation. Okay? It's not that he is sitting like a stone. He uses the senses. He uses them only when there's a need to use them. He has a full control over them. And the same thing goes for the mind and the intellect also. So this is what Lord Krishna is telling us. Okay, so he does not sit like a statue. In fact, he is a very vibrant, very dynamic worker in this world. Let's start the class with verse number 59 today and see what else he's telling us about this yogi, this enlightened being. Vishyaha vinirvatante nirahase dehina rasvarjam rasa apiyasya param drishtva nivartate. Vishya, the objects of senses. Vinirvatante, turns away, restrain. Niraharasya, practicing self-restraint, abstinent. Dehina, of the man or for the embodied. Rasvarjam, cessation of taste or leaving the longing. This ras means the longing. Rasaha, the longing or the taste. Api means even. Asya, of his. Param, the supreme. Drishtva, having seen or on realization. Nirvartate, turns away. So the objects of the senses turn away from the abstinent man, leaving the longing behind. But his longing also turns away on seeing the Supreme. So over here, Lord Krishna is assuring us all these mental impressions we have about longing. It will go away eventually when we see the Supreme. First, we have to go through the discipline. We have to work on our senses so that they just do not keep on going outwardly all the time. Retract them. But eventually, you will not even have a taste for anything outside. Because it is so pale compared to that Supreme. So that's why he said his longing also turns away on seeing the Supreme. Because God is all bliss. When the soul attains God, it becomes satiated in bliss. The lower just automatically falls down when you have achieved the higher. So he who would acquire steadiness of right knowledge, pragya, should bring the senses under control first. That we have to do. Because if they are not controlled, then we are not going to go up. So control your senses. That's what he's saying. But with this discipline, with this practice, all those seeds of those sanskaras, they'll get roasted. There won't be any longing left. Because right now what happens? We hear about something. Somebody is talking about it, right away we want to have it or go there. We don't even think twice about it. But once we have this realization, with the help of the practice, then longing will go away too. No matter where the crowds are going, you won't even have any taste for it, any longing for it. So this is a yogi. Yatta hi api kauntya purushasya vipaschita indriyani pramathini haranti prasubham mana. Yatta. Yatta means striving. When you are striving, yatan. He means indeed, api means even, kauntya, Arjun. Purushasya, the person. Vipaschita, the wise, the person who is well endowed with discrimination, vipashchita. Indriyane, the senses, parmathine, turbulent, haranti, carry away, prasabhavam, forcibly, mana, the mind. The turbulent senses, O son of Kunti, do violently carry away the mind of a wise man, though he be striving to control them. So what he is trying to tell us, that be very vigilant. Make sure your practice becomes very stable, strong, long time. Because you can think that you are very wise now. You have done practice for a long time. And if you just take it easy, again, you will fall into the prey of the sense objects. So this is, that means that our tapa, our sadhana, do not relax. Make sure you keep on doing your sadhana. So very practical method by which we should struggle hard to do our sadhana, he's telling us. Because this temptations of this Maya is so strong. The rope of this sattvic, rajasic and tamasic Maya, it is very strong. Do not take it lightly. And the senses are like wild horses. So if we have just started to harness them, you're trying to discipline them, and you just become a little lazy about it, they will definitely drag you down. So if you want to grow spiritually, he says, be careful. Strive to tame the indulgent senses. And those senses are what? All the lust and the greed, the temptations. That's what senses want. Just be careful about it. Because unless the senses are well controlled, they will drag the mind to the field of the sense objects. So mind goes out with the help of the senses. And these five senses we are familiar with. Our eyes, our ears, touch, taste, smell. Five senses, which are called Jnanendriya. There have been many, many stories in our scriptures to show us that, because he used the word vipashchit over here. So even a person who has been on this path for a long time, if they become little careless about it, they can drag down. It's a very powerful story in Bhagavad Puran about sage Sobhri. He did a lot of tapasya, lived in the jungles, in a hut, and there was a water pond next to him. One day, while he was doing his sadhana, he saw the fish in the pond. Fish with the baby fish, very happy, playing. And all of a sudden he said, oh gosh, this fish is so happy with the children. How happy I can be if I have children. So thought of getting married. And the story goes that he does get married to the 50 princesses. Because he goes to the king, and king said, yeah, if my daughters want to marry you, any one of my daughters, and they all agreed to marry him, then he had to marry all of them. And this is a story in the Bhagavad Puran. Then later on, he says, Aho imam pashyate me vinasham. He said, oh humans, those of you who make plans to attain happiness through material acquisitions, be careful. Look at my degradation. Where I was and where am I now? Sure, I could create 50 bodies for those 50 princesses. I had that sadhana, but look at me. What happened to my sadhana after that? Aho imam pashyate me vinasham. That's why Lord Krishna is saying that these senses are very turbulent. Violently they carry away the mind, even of a wise man. So if you think that you have studied enough meditation, enough dhan punya, but still mind can be carried away with the senses. Be careful. That's what he's telling us. Tane sarvane sanyame yuktaha asit matpara vashe hi yase indriyani tasya pragya pratishtita. Tani, them, sarvani, all, sanyame, having restrained, yuktaha, united. This united means absorption in devotion. Asit, should sit or seated. Matpara, intent on me or towards me. Vashe, under control. He means indeed, yasya, whose, indriyani, senses, tasya, his, pragya, wisdom, perfect knowledge, pragya. Pratishtita, fixed, settled. Having restrained them all. So that means all the senses. He should sit steadfast. Intent on me. His wisdom is steady, whose senses are under control. Senses are under control. So after warning us, he's telling us that do this kind of a sadhana. We should constantly struggle to control all our sense organs. See, according to the modern psychology, control is to suppress. And of course, the suppression is not healthy. But this Bhagavad Gita or the Vedic theory is not telling us to mentally suppress. They are advising us with the help of this knowledge, where the inner growth can happen and we can spiritually develop. So knowledge is there. This is called as sublimation, not suppression. If you just only suppress, then it's a different theory. This is not suppression. Okay, because we tell our intellect, when we are trying to retract our senses, we are supposed to tell them that, hey, there is a higher bliss, more joy, eternal joy, where you are going. It's almost like a child goes to college. Child wants to just party, and the parents will give the wisdom to the child. Sure, party will be fun right now, but you won't be able to do what you're supposed to do. You won't get a degree. Don't fall for the short-term pleasure. Go after the ultimate goal. And that's what we tell our senses when we sit down. So with the help of the knowledge, and that's why it's not a suppression. So Lord Krishna is advising us that withdraw from the unhealthy gutters of sensuousness and give your senses a healthy method of doing and explain it to the senses, some positive technique for self-perfection. Okay, otherwise this mind is very powerful, senses are very turbulent. So absorption in the devotion of God, that's what we are supposed to do. Okay, so expose your mind to the quiet atmosphere of meditation on a daily basis. See, when we do it on a daily basis, it's almost like it's better to exercise daily little bit than just once a month or once a week a lot. The same thing, the daily meditation is a lot more important. Even though if you meditate for 15-20 minutes, you will see the effectiveness of that is a lot more. And now in the next verse, Lord Krishna proceeds to point out the source of all the evils in the case of the unsuccessful. These two verses, 62 and 63, they go together. And very popular verses. This is almost like a ladder of fall. What really happens? Why do we get dragged down? In spite of knowing all this, why do we not rise up? We just slip down. So let's look at 62 first. Dhyayata vishyan punsaha sangaha teshu upjayate sangat sanjayate kamaha kamat krodha abhijayate krodhat bhavati samoha samohat samriti vibhrama samriti bhranshat buddhi nasha buddhi nashat pranashyati. Dhyayata means thinking, contemplating. Vishyan, on the objects of the senses, vishya. Punsaha, a person. Sangaha, attachment. Teshu, in them, upajayate, arises. Sangat, from attachment, from sanga, sanjayate, develops or born. Kamaha, desire. Kamat, from desire. Krodha, anger. Abhijayate, arises. So when a person thinks of objects, attachment for them arises, and we are familiar with it. We see something and we start thinking about it, and we want to have it. So when a person thinks of objects, attachment for them arises. From attachment, desire is born. From desire arises anger. Okay, when the desire is not fulfilled, anger. Towards the person or towards the situation. Krodhat, from anger, bhavati comes some moha, delusion, clouding of judgment. Samohat, from delusion, samriti vibhrama, loss of memory. Samriti is the memory, so bewilderment of memory. Samriti bhranshat, from the loss of memory, buddhi nasha, the destruction of intellect. Buddhi nashat, from the destruction of intellect, pranashyati, he perishes or is ruined. From anger comes delusion, from delusion, loss of memory, from loss of memory, the destruction of discrimination, from destruction of discrimination, he perishes. So where did it start from? Thinking about the object. Thinking about the object, attachment comes. From the attachment, you want it, you cannot have it, anger is born. And then the rest of it, we are very familiar with it too. We lose the discrimination, that faculty which human beings are known for, to be able to discriminate between the right and wrong, between the temporary and the permanent. We'll see that from this verse onward, Lord Krishna is explaining the very beautiful 5 verses which we try to understand and try to bring this wisdom in our life. We can save ourselves from the fall. That's a slipping. So he says the source of all evil starts from our wrong thinking or false imagination. We all know that thought can create or thought can destroy us. Instead of this, mind has been given us to think about God, the wisdom, and we start thinking about the objects. That's what it is. Dhyayata Vishyan Punsara. Then burning desire is there for that. Okay, just like it's a ladder of a fall. That's what it's called. Ladder of fall. Anger impairs our judgment. It's almost like a haziness comes with the anger on our mind. Because of anger, people commit big crimes, which later they regret. But they said, I don't know what came over me. Anger. So we got to be careful about it. So the means of moksha is described in the next verse. Because in these two verses, he's telling us how we can slip down. But at the same time, he's telling us how can we move up also. Verse number 64. Rag dvesh viyukte hetu vishyan indriye charan atam vashye vidheyatma prasadam adhigachate. Rag dvesh viyukte, free from attraction and repulsion. Rag is the attraction, dvesh is the repulsion. Two means what? Vishyan, objects. Indriya, senses. Charan means moving or using. Atam vashye, controlling one's mind or self-restraint. Vidheyatma, one who controls the mind or is self-controlled. Prasadam, the grace of God. And that's also called a peace. Prasad means peace also. Adhigachati, attains. But the self-controlled person, moving among objects. So we don't have to run away from the objects. So yogi also lives in the objects, does not run away. So that's what he's saying. But the self-controlled person moving among objects with his senses under restraint, free from both attraction and repulsion, attains peace. So this is the technique we need to cultivate. Objects, they can stay outside. Objects definitely then should be used. But when we keep on thinking about them, those objects are using us. This is the sadhana we need to do. Use the objects, don't get into the position where they are using you. Because if you're constantly thinking about it, they're using you. So by running away from the sense objects, nobody can assure himself or herself inner peace. So this disturbance depends not upon the presence or the absence of the sense objects, but it's about the control of the mind and the senses. Otherwise, you can go into the cave, there are no objects over there, but in your mind, still you are thinking about the objects. So what's in the mind? That's what we have to say. So when the mind is trained in two aspects, to live in self-control and to move among the sense objects with neither attachment nor repulsion. Okay? No rag and no dvesh. This condition of the mind is called tranquility, prasad, the peace. Sometimes we think that we get happiness from the objects. That's why we think about the objects. Objects doesn't mean only the physical objects. Objects could be the relationships also, the places also. But we got to think about it. Where is the happiness coming from? Is it really coming from the object or the person? The Vedas, they say, contemplate upon it. Happiness is the nature of the soul. Envision happiness in the proper direction. Because we think that happiness, if this object did not give me happiness, maybe next object will. Happiness is not in the objects. Happiness is in God. That's why the term we use for God is Sat Chit Anand. We are all familiar with that term, that Anand is in God. I hope this light is not bothering you on my face, but it's okay. So if we can repeatedly revise the thought that happiness is in God, what will happen? Because that formula that we keep on thinking about the objects and we think that happiness is from the objects, we keep on thinking about the objects. But if we can change that, turn it around and know that happiness is in God, then we'll definitely have attachment to God instead of attachment to the objects. So we have turned around towards the right direction. And this is called a divine attachment. And this is what this prasad word is actually. This peace comes from divine attachment. Otherwise, when the mind is going towards the objects, we are degrading our mind. That's called a material attachment. And this is called a spiritual attachment. And that's how we purify our mind also. Because God is the only all pure, the purest. And when our mind is attached to it, our mind becomes pure too. So that is called a spiritual attachment. Okay? And we don't have to have a dvesh or the aversion for the material things. Because if we have aversion towards the material things, then we are thinking about, in a negative sense, thinking about the world. So neither attachment nor aversion for the sense objects. They are there. Use them when you need to use them, but do not think about them. Either with love or with hate. Because the wish is hate. I don't like this. I don't like this. No, we don't have to say that either. They are there. That's it. But mind should be absorbed in devotion to God. And that's how we receive the grace of God. That's how we experience the unlimited divine bliss. And once we experience that, when we experience that unlimited bliss, then no attraction. Automatically, it's like a rasvarjam rasa api asya param drishtva nirvartate. Automatically, it has just moved away. But to reach here, we have to do the sadhana. To reach here, we have to control the senses. We have to be very diligent about it. Don't be careless. Then what will happen when peace is attained? Let's look at that verse also, because we all want peace. We use the word Shanti all the time. We want Shanti. We pray for Shanti for others also. What really happens? Prasade sarva dukha nam hani asye upajayate prasanna chetsa hi ashu buddhi paryavatishthate. Prasade, in peace, sarva dukha nam, of all sorrows, of all pains, hani, destruction, asya, of him, upajayate, arises. Prasanna chetasa, of the tranquil mind. He means because ashu, soon, buddhi, intellect, pari avatishthate, becomes steady. In that peace, all sorrows are destroyed. For the intellect of the tranquil minded soon becomes steady. Okay? That doesn't mean that prarabdhavash, there won't be any kind of a tragedy in that person's life, but the mind will not get shaken up. There's a stability in that mind. Because reading this, sometimes people say that, oh, I have seen the great sages also going through the cancers and going through the tragedies of life. Sure, outside they go through the prarabdhas, whatever the law of nature is, but internally they are totally peaceful. It's just like they feel that grace is like a divine energy that floods into a person's personality. By grace, God bestows this person his divine knowledge, his divine love, and his divine bliss. This is what happens. It's like there's an umbrella over this person, which is an umbrella of divinity. And then there's no sorrow. Physical tragedies could be, but there's no mental sorrow at all. My mind is totally steady. So buddhi pariyavtishthate. So by God's grace, when we experience the higher taste of divine bliss, the agitations for sensual happiness is extinguished. And in that state of internal fulfillment, intellect becomes even firmer. We really know that God alone is the source of happiness. Because previously, sure, we had the intellect, but intellect was accepting this only on the basis of knowledge. Because we know that scriptures say it, Guru says it, so we believe in it. But now it has become that person's experience. So this is what over here, prasanna chetsa hi ashu buddhi pariyavtishthate. So in tranquility, all sorrows are destroyed. And this is the definition of a true happiness. So mind has to be peaceful. If the mind is not peaceful, that is not happiness. That's why they say peace is happiness, happiness is peace. And where does it start? Intelligent self-control. That is the secret, self-control. Vasanas need to be exhausted intelligently. The discipline should be part of our life, not just here and there, every day. Every day devote some time for the discipline. Then see that if that is part of our life or not, all the time or not. And then one day, without even knowing, we'll reach where what he's telling us that we'll reach. So next week we'll start with verse number 66. And today I want to give some time to Urmil also to recite some of the verses. So Urmil, if you can recite about 15 verses today. And then Manny has a bhajan, beautiful bhajan for us. Ready? So let me end the class with the Shanti part. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vishishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.
Should I sing bhajan?